Are you familiar with this one? I'm sure you are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I believe in the States we like this one, using this one because it's a sports analogy often. So I think traditionally lean in has been used to describe a context of sport, to kind of shift one's body weight, forward or towards something or something. So like in surfing, you might lean into a wave, or in sailing, you might lean into the wind, or in skiing, you might sort of lean into a slope or a turn. So it's essentially when we embrace a context or some sort of system that that if we kind of operate within that, we embrace it, we can take sort of our natural momentum in our favor, rather than making any waves or stepping on anyone's toes, by cutting against the grain of normalcy. But in corporate America, it's often a recommendation, especially after Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. I believe it's become sort of a recommendation to sort of fake it until you make it, or sort of go with the flow. And this is why women who should be leaders in their companies are often expected and encouraged to lean in, by behaving like stereotypical men, like speaking loudly, speaking with confidence and certainty, and speaking often. So we would rather tell women, the problem is your posture, and you should lean forward and raise your hand more often in meetings. That way, we don't actually have to pay them equally, because that would hurt shareholder value. We rather tell women to lean in than to ask any incompetent men to step aside. And the same way, I think racial and ethnic minorities are often encouraged to act white, to lean in, because lean in sounds more sensible and reasonable than to ask women to act like stereotypical men, or for Black people to act like stereotypical white people. And that's where I think this idea of leaning in is often used. That's probably, I guess, my most cynical response out of out of the set.
Didn't pull any punches there at all. Wow, that had a lot more oomph to it than I was thinking of. And there's loads of fascinating things there. So first of all, you reckon that this lean in word pairing existed before Sheryl Sandberg's book, and it was mainly in a sporting context?
Yes, I think it was used most often in that way. But then after her book was, it became a bestseller, people were more familiar. And after Amy Cuddy's research and sort of snafu, I guess, that women should, they stand up straight with their, with their shoulders up, and have the look of the stereotypical, white leader that we're supposed to emulate, as opposed to acting, being your best self or acting any other way.
It's really interesting. That's a lot more sinister than the UK interpretation of it. I think we just took it on face value that, although we don't necessarily always like Sheryl Sandberg, which happens to be at the top of a company that causes some difficulties for quite a lot of people. Nevertheless, the broad message of the book, it felt like, from this side of the water anyway, was as an empowering manual, 99% for women, absolutely, and in a positive way. What's become interesting over here, I think, in particular, is that it's often been adopted by change management consultancies. And they will have programs that will say, oh, well, of course, we're in a transformation program. We need you all, brackets, thousands of employees, to lean into change. And this is, it doesn't matter, male, female, and all points in between. If you don't lean in, you're regarded as a naysayer, someone who isn't backing the company in its transformational direction, and therefore you're regarded as being a stick in the mud, and you're probably going to get your marching orders fairly soon. And that's the sinister version of it. It's much more universal as I hear it. If you don't lean in, you're not cooperating, so you're going to have to go.
Yes, yes. And that's why I use the term sort of go with the flow.
Yeah.
And people are not encouraged to, you don't want to stick your neck out, especially if the majority is going one direction and you think, well, maybe we should be going another direction. It's much harder to go against the current. And there's another term that's used sometimes along with this that I think does go with the sort of the empowering suggestion of leaning in, and that is to we say hunker down dog. So like a sports team is, when their backs are against the wall and the game is close, they're supposed to hunker down like a bulldog, and be but again, that suggests that we have to stick together, and we need to all conform to the process and the procedure or the game plan that the company is going, or the team is going. And if you don't lean in, you don't hunker down, no, you're probably going to be rejected in some way.
You're off the team.
It goes together with those.
That's really good. I've scribbled a note about hunker down dog. I mean, we know about hunkering down, but the dog bit I was unfamiliar with. That's really, really good.
Yeah.
We could run, by the way, an entire separate session dedicated solely to American sporting metaphors. And when you told me about lean in, it reminded me of one of I've got so many pet hates, it's ridiculous. We could just sit and moan for hours on end, couldn't we? But pivot. When I was researching pivot in great detail, I hate pivot because I think it's essentially just interchangeable with saying we were heading in one direction. It was an absolute disaster. So we had to head completely in the opposite direction. I'm going to call that a pivot, instead of saying we completely cocked it up and we had to change our mind. But from my research, and I don't know if you know, is that if it's correct, is that pivot originally, apart from the basic mechanical thing of whacking a nail into a piece of steel and so on, came very much from basketball, and defining where a player can spin very fast on their axis, as it were, and head off in another direction to deceive the opposition. I don't know if you...
Yes. Yeah, pivot definitely in basketball and American football, too. Like if a running back is running one direction, they almost never reverse direction and cross the field, without gaining some, when there's no yardage to be gained. It's kind of a cardinal sin to do that when everyone's blocking for you. But people in corporate America love to use these sports analogies like lean in or pivot, because it makes total sense. But the problem is it's very compelling. It's very compelling and persuasive to say, oh, well, because especially when everyone's talking about the game last night, then it's useful. If it works there, then it should work here, right? But oftentimes there are data, relevant, important data that are coming in that are not not enough of it is collected before there's a decision to move. So there's sort of the decisions are made without any respect for regression to the mean, without any sort of understanding of robust statistical effects, and likely variation. So what often happens is a company might adopt a new procedure or maybe do some hiring, and then within a month they're attributing any change, good or bad, to that new hire or that new procedure, when in reality they've pivoted. They've already leaned into an assumption without actually looking at data long term. Usually probably need like 6 months to a year in many cases to collect enough data to justify leaning in or pivoting in any other direction.
So, John, there was one there that I was really fascinated about, since we're in the field of sport, which seems to be an almost endless field. And it's a phrase I heard a while back. And honestly, when I first heard it in a British business meeting, I really didn't get it at all. Someone said, "Has this idea got bench?"
Okay.
Now,
Never heard that one.
You've never heard that one?
Got bench. Yeah.
I investigate. First of all, I'm completely baffled, of course. So, has this idea got bench? I then rummaged around and found out that the analogy was essentially that the best sports teams in the world have a substitutes bench of reserve players that is very long and deep. Yeah. So even if you bring a sub on, you've still got high quality on the pitch. Mm-hmm. And so in a business meeting, someone has bastardized this into saying, yes, has this idea got bench? In other words, has it got a load of backup possibilities that make it a very fertile thing for us to pursue? That's what I believe it means.
Yeah. So oftentimes sports teams will have, like, I know certainly in basketball, they might say, does the team have depth? Yeah. Do they have a bench in terms of, do they have 3 or 4 players that can come in if someone is injured, if someone is winded, fatigued? Can somebody come in and perform at an acceptable level, close to that of the starter? So I could see this being used to describe personnel within a company, but it's not. I don't believe that particular analogy has gotten has been commonplace. Maybe depth and breadth. Do we have depth and breadth? Maybe, but yeah, that analogy isn't used as much. I think people in corporate America are always more sensitive, with regard to the security of their jobs. So, allusions to, well, do we have someone that can replace this person, or do we have depth? Can we promote this person or fire this person without losing much traction? It probably happens in private more than it does, in team meetings or general conversation within companies.
Thanks. In a way, I'm actually rather relieved to find that you hadn't heard it in that context before. So maybe I was just in the presence of one idiot using it incorrectly, or just as a one-off. Who knows?
Yeah, it may also be a matter of time. Usually, these analogies from sports do make it into common conversation.
Definitely.